I like to segment skills and look at, well, what can you take from what the AI infers? And I'd say you don't want to really put anything more than like 15, 20 skills on someone's profile. They might be able to add more themselves, but people are more than skills. So it's if you can add more data beyond skills as well, projects, work that people have done and their interests and things like that. So it's looking at a person much more holistically. Starting small and doing some test and learns is really critical, and creating your own evidence, but on something that is a use case. It might be something like areas where you've got problems recruiting, where you might be able to start building those skills internally. And we might spend quite a lot of effort and time and money on recruiting people externally when you could retrain people, or as they say, reskill or upskill people internally.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Nestor Leadership Podcast. My name is Raluca, and I'm pleased to host a new episode today. And let me introduce our special guest today. She is Teresa Rose, and we will talk about a very, very hot topic nowadays. And this is about the secrets behind skills transformations. So, Teresa, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Really glad to be here.
Thank you. So before going into our conversation today, I'd love to add just a few words about you. And after that, I'll pass the mic to you to help the audience learn more about your background and experience. So Teresa is an award-winning learning and performance consultant. She has over 16 years experience in organizational and people development. So I'm pleased to have this conversation with you today about skills, successful skills transformations. And I'm impressed because I've seen that you worked with so important companies up until now, like the World Bank Group, Deutsche Bank, Dixo, University of Cambridge. So thanks so much for being here. And yeah, we would love to learn more about you, more about your background, your experience so far. So yeah, I'm passing the mic to you to give us a very short intro about yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I would say as well that learning and organizational development is my fourth career, and I find that helps me bring a lot of different perspectives to my work because I've worked as a manager and a leader. I've worked in different sectors, in different roles, and that really does help me think from the customer's point of view. And the last 4 or 5 years, as you've said, I've been working with a range of different clients and built up my portfolio of work. And the last 3 years has definitely been spent very much in the skills transformation space with different sized organizations and at different stages in that journey.
Thank you so much. Teresa, you are a strong promoter of these skills-based approaches in the new world of work, or at least it is being said that this is not so new. What can you share into from this point of view? Because some of the companies out there would think that, okay, this is a new approach out there, but basically we were looking at some competencies and some skills a few years back as well. So what's your approach on this topic?
Yeah, I don't know whether I'd say I'm a promoter. I think one of the first things is whether or not it's right for your organization. So it's working out, is that the right direction for you to go in? Because there are different aspects that you could take from the principles of being skills first or skills powered or skills based, whichever one you aspire to be. And it does have a lot of history going back to competencies, and there have been lots and lots of challenges. I've been on the receiving end of competency models and also worked in organizations where we've implemented them. And people think, oh, what's the difference between skills and competencies? And one of the main differences I think we now have is that we've got AI and technology to help scale and keep that up to date. And there is then an aspect of data, because we've now got the data and analytics, and combining those two at the heart of your organizational processes, it gives you a golden thread throughout the organization as you start to build that, and provides you with data and data-driven decision making that wasn't there before. So that's one of the key differences, though I have done a lot of research on the approach, and I found research dating back to the early 90s that skills-based organizations existed even then, and they use the best of HR practices, those practices that are deemed better for high performance and high performing organizations. And in organizations as well, where like consultancy services, where skills are important. So it's not anything that's necessarily new. It's probably more about the way that we go about it and what we can do with the technologies that we now have at our disposal.
So it's about evolution and
Yeah, evolution of the model. Yes, yeah.
And using also the technology in order to help us take another perspective and make better decisions from this point of view.
Yes.
You mentioned about the concept skills-based organization, skills management, being or start thinking of implementing this into your company. It's something that is like a buzzword today. Looking at what the research data is saying out there is like 20% of the companies at this point in time adopt a skills-based solution or implement some sort of this kind of solutions today. This is quite a low number, if I'm allowed to say like this, and this number is taken from HR Executive Magazine.
Okay.
What do you think is the problem here? Is it a problem? Is it an approach? Maybe some of the organizations out there are not ready yet. What do you think about this?
A mixture. I'm always wary of surveys and that data, though it can be informative. It's really about looking at your own context. It might not work in certain sectors. It might not work in parts of your organization. It may be useful in some certain aspects. So it might even that you take a very segmented and targeted approach to where you do use data and skills, and you might have quite a mobile workforce, and it could be in tech in those areas of your organization where you need more fluidity of your people and how you move them around, and also the projects that you have in. And you think about Unilever's often held up as one of the great case studies, but they're quite an unusual organization. They're FMCG. That setup works really well for them. It might not work another organization in a completely different sector, or even an organization in that sector and different context.
Yeah, and when we look, and of course, based on your experience so far, you are working with enterprise level organizations to implement this kind of strategies. I was wondering, maybe you can share with us what are some of the challenges. Of course, there are also based on industries and the way the organization starts to think of adopting this kind of skill strategy. What would be some of the challenges that we may expect or you faced so far? Maybe you can give us one or two examples.
One of the main challenges is actually knowing where to start. It's like how broad do you take it? So identifying use cases and gathering your data and having evidence that there is a need there, rather than suddenly saying, oh, well, we need to find out what our skills data is because this organization's doing it and that organization's doing it. You might have all that data at your disposal. It might be how you're managing it. I think another one of the challenges is starting to look at the technology landscape, all of the different skills frameworks, because every vendor is coming out with a different approach, different skill levels, proficiency descriptions. Then you also have professional bodies and open source frameworks that are out there. So it becomes quite a complex market landscape, and it gets even more complicated. And with what different research organizations come out with as well, there is so much to digest around the topic. So it does become very complicated and complex. And yeah, starting small and doing some test and learns is really critical, and creating your own evidence, but on something that is a use case that is going to help all parts of your organization. I often find that organizations focus too much on the benefits to the organization and potentially talent departments and management, as opposed to what are the benefits for the employee, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to be using the system. And it also always surprises me that end users aren't involved. I get involved in projects at different stages. If I'm in the very early stage, I also always ensure that research is done with the end users, because you need to establish what their challenges are, what frictions are there for them, mapping out things like their current workflows, and things like service blueprint, and establishing where the new process might work. And often another challenge I find they have is not really working out the costs and time involved in this, because it is a very lengthy, long process, and you're looking at years, not months.
Yeah, definitely. And it's very, at least what I feel is very important to involve people, or at least a group of people, into identifying this need. And after that, maybe involving during a pilot, so that you learn that you're on the right track with this. So, because you mentioned about that this process can be, or can become at some point, very complex, we need to know, or at least we need to consider where to start from, what to implement, what to collect, who will help us, and so on. I was wondering, because yes, the complexity part may be something that scares at some point. What would be one advice from your point of view into start collecting some of the skills out there? Of course, if you don't have any at this point in time, would be more focus on different type of skills, or we may have identified some of the critical skills. How and where to start from, beside the fact that we need to identify like maybe a very small use case and demonstrate the process on that, and after that think of scaling it.
It might be something like areas where you've got problems recruiting, whether that's particularly externally, and where you might be able to start building those skills internally. So starting to cost out things like attrition as well. If you're losing people, what's the reason for that? So often people are leaving because they're not getting the career development, and we might spend quite a lot of effort and time and money on recruiting people externally, when you could retrain people, or as they say, reskill or upskill people internally to fulfill those roles. So if you don't know who's got what skill, you can't make those build by or even now as well AI decisions around workforce planning. So that tends to be one of the key areas, because if you don't know that data, how can you plan for the work that you've got coming up? And where are those capability gaps? But it might also be looking at, I mean, the Singapore government is a really good case study to look at, and their countrywide skills frameworks and what they're doing there. So there are some really good cases, and also the work that's come out from the World Economic Forum, that report that's come out on those lighthouse case studies, because they're across different sectors, which is nice to see. They're not just large corporates. There are government bodies, public bodies, and smaller organisations. So you can see some of the things that they've done and how they've established why that area was important to focus on, and using some of that, say again, gathering your internal data and really finding out from your stakeholders, from your employees, where the pain points are for them, and solving them, and doing something like scoring them as well, working on the use cases, and deciding which use cases are going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah, definitely. And because you mentioned about technology and AI, most of the systems out there start involving and employing AI into helping simplify the process. And yes, this is very true. And yes, we need the power of technology to maybe simplify, or at least speed up a little bit the process out there. Jobs are changing, business needs are changing. Also, we feel that this transition from different job roles to skill sets, and looking for skill sets is very important. I was wondering, what do you think about inferring skills and using the AI technology into maybe simplifying the process and help us in this process? What's your take and advice for organizations out there?
Yeah, there's lots of benefits, but there's also knowing and having the human oversight as well alongside the AI. So I really do like systems where the end user and the manager and a subject matter expert can go in and check and verify and validate those skills that have been allocated. And also where you've got a very specific skills, because I like to segment skills and look at, well, what can you take from what the AI infers, and can you then add in your own content, but not too much of it. So it's a balance because it's keeping that up to date. But if you've got a very specific skills to your organization, you're not going to engage the end user if those skills don't relate to the work that they do. So it's a balance between what you have from the AI, because there's a lot of generic skills that are going to be there. They tend to be more so in some technical areas, but more so in the behavioral or capabilities that people need, like whether that's influencing or breaking down different communication skills. So it's having a balance between the two. But what it does do is help you to keep it updated. And that's where governance also comes into play as well. So I've written recently about having like a skill sensing network in your organization. So going back to what I said earlier around using external data, your internal data, and what's going on in your business sector to look at, well, how often do we really need to keep any of our custom content updated? Who reviews it? When do we review it? What information are we using? And keeping a track of that so that you're doing the best of both.
Yeah, so balance, and using multiple
Yes.
ways of validating the
Yeah.
data in order to help
Yeah.
us is a very good take from this point of view. Because of course, as you have mentioned, we may use technology in order to suggest some of the default skill sets out there, but
Yes.
doesn't actually mean that they could be really helpful for us. At the very first side could be, but yeah, the business value yeah, on the long term is like combining all of those. So when we look at what one person, usually when we say skills-based organizations, mapping skills across job roles, skills profiles for employees, because we may tend to add so many skills to one person.
Mhm.
So I'm just an employee and I'm picking some of the skills for myself, or is the HR admin, or is the manager. So everything seems to be important to bring into that
Yeah.
profile. What would be some of the skills that we need to consider first?
What actual skills to consider, or a number of skills?
Number of skills or
Number of
type
skills,
of
yeah.
skills? Because actual skills, I think, is depends a lot on the industry and the job role.
Yeah, it might be that you're doing some work with the stakeholders and you identify priority skills for certain roles, and you don't really overload people so that they can be focused on what's most important to their role and what you need to do as an organization or a department. And that then is going to narrow that down. But I'd say you don't want to really put anything more than like 15, 20 skills on someone's profile. They might be able to add more themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important that the employee has control over their profile and they can add more skills. It might be, from their history, but people are more than skills. So it's if you can add more data beyond skills as well, projects, work that people have done, and their interests and things like that. So it's looking at a person much more holistically. People are far more than a list of skills.
Yeah, definitely. It's so important to focus the person at the very beginning on what's important, and after that, you mentioned that. Okay, let's let the person do anything they want with their profile. What about the validation for the skills? Because I may be
Ooh.
so
We
so.
could spend a whole day talking about that topic, I think. I think that's again where you have to look at your HR processes, your people processes, where you might use them for decision making, and where certain things could be more subjective, but also being open and transparent with employees about where skills are used as part of a decision processing, not overall as a decision making process. So it is using different assessment methodologies And also there's a difference between, for me, for validation and assessment of skills, and gathering that data and that evidence in different ways. So it might be that you can't do it all in one system or all one method, and then you've got mixed methods. I've run assessment centres before, and they tend to be a whole day when you're making, really higher level decisions on executive appointments and things like that. You're going to be looking at a lot more data sets than purely a skills assessment, and it's a self-assessment on a lot of these systems, and they in themselves are quite dangerous. You can't really make any decisions on a self-assessment, because we often don't know what we don't know, and you've got a lot of biases in there, like Dunning-Kruger. So some of the ways you could get over bias is that you're going to ask several peers, a bit like a 360-degree feedback, and your manager, and you start to aggregate that data.
Yeah.
And that starts to remove some of that bias.
Exactly.
But it's a mix as well between, you don't want just the quantitative data, what qualitative information and evidence have you got that people have been able to use that skill as knowledge and do something with it. So you could just gather lots of skills, but what are you actually doing with that skill to impart the knowledge and create some form of value?
And one of the values that you see is about, okay, we identify what is basically the gap is like where I should be, where the employee is from different perspectives, and we identify there is a need for upskilling or development that direction. I was wondering, because there is so much need to see how, or at least to see how I can evolve from starting from here as an employee. And this is highly connected with the training part, with maybe using an LMS system out there. So from your point of view, what is the most important thing, or at least it's just an opinion, would an LMS be very important, like learning management system where you have all the trainings in there, would be the first thing to consider? The most important thing would be, or another important thing would be to see where I need to improve, or the matching, or using those two systems all at once in order to better help the employee, and of course learning and development consultants to see how to target development opportunities internally. What's your take on this, and how this kind of system can function together?
For me, the most important part is where you can start to learn through the work that you do, as opposed to necessarily going and getting lots of content or learning pathways from the learner management system. They don't have a significant impact in upskilling unless I can actually apply that into the workplace. And that is also a danger. I've written about that as well with future skills. Because we get lots of lists this time of year of these all the future skills, but if we spend time developing people, and I've seen this in an organisation I worked in a couple of years ago, a big campaign around future skills and giving everyone access to these different pathways, which they're then not going to use because they're not relevant, and they're a poor investment, and there are challenges on learning and development budgets. There are challenges on showing impact and value. So it's really important to think very carefully around what you do put in place for development. And if you're starting to build up the skills and the data, and you want to then use a talent marketplace, that's one way where you could put stretch assignments on there and things in the work that people can do alongside a content strategy. And that's really important as well, because often people will go through a proficiency assessment and they'll do that self-assessment that we've just touched on, and they'll get recommended content, but that content isn't necessarily helping them move from one level to another. And it's also important that it takes time. It takes time to improve your proficiency, and that's through practice. So it's anything that you can give you an opportunity to practice. And another important point is developing that skill in isolation, because your skills are interoperable. They're what create you and how you go about your work. So it's important that you don't focus on one skill at a detriment to another, and you think about how those skills might be combined in the work that you do.
Yes, and to get even more value by combining all the skills that you have, or at
Yes.
least a few of those. So the take is like, so we don't have to think only on the content side, that
No, not at all. No.
gain knowledge, but we need to practice the knowledge we gain, so that maybe projects or shadowing someone or practicing something or learning and doing something and something afterwards, this would be really helpful to help us upskill like efficiently.
And now we have AI as well, so we can individually use AI as a way to learn and use it as a our own personal tutor as well.
Yeah, definitely. Teresa, thank you so much for everything that you have shared with us today. I'm getting back to the last question that I may add in here.
Okay.
Is if you have anything that you may add in all or complete our conversation, what organizations could consider more in order to have a complete skills tech ecosystem into their skill strategy?
I think it's really looking and auditing your current systems, because you might find that you've got some functionality in a system you already have that you didn't know about. So that would be a starting point if you're wanting to look at skills tech before deciding to go out and get a new system in place. It's also thinking about, if you're looking at a new system, your overall HR tech strategy then, because it might be that you don't need some of the tech you've got. You might be able to get a system in that replaces some of that. And that's again another long-term plan and strategy. And it's involving those partners in that. This is very collaborative to work. It's not got to be one area of HR that's leading it. It can't just be L&D, particularly if it's a larger organization. It has to be an organization-wide project, particularly involving your IT partners. They're so important to this. You data scientists are so important to this. And of course, your end users, which often gets forgotten. So I'm going to remind what I said earlier on, that this is so important, and it just doesn't really happen enough. It just makes such a difference to co-create, if we're going to use some buzzwords, with the people that you want to use it.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing all of these insights with us. I'm very sure that the audience out there took very important notes, and I'm very pleased that we had this conversation today about skills transformations, about how we should approach this, how we can look into this, and I'm really keen to have another conversation very soon. Thanks so much for joining,
Thank you.
Teresa. It was great having you today.
Thank you, Raluca. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.